So I'm going to start off with this little thing that Patrick brought in that he had found not too long ago out in the shop and kind of got it cleaned up. And so I haven't talked about this in a previous video before. I don't recall if I saw him use it. I've seen him use it. I don't recall. So this little thing is a little stove. I don't even know where or if you can find one just like this, but he got this when he was in the Cub Scouts. I was like, really? Man, this thing is old. So it's kind of cool because it's very compact. You open it up like so. He had to show me how to do this. You flip this thing out, and then you've got your little burner. You can see that your little burner's right there. And then it's got the knob. If I can get it out of here, this thing, where you adjust the heat, the flame. Let me get it together. It slips through this little hole and then onto there, like that. And so then you cook on this right here. So that was really cool. But the nice thing about something like this is because it's so compact, you can take it camping. This is something that he was keeping, keeps in his rig. He used to commute to work about 45 minutes, with hour and a half round trip. And so he always kept all that stuff in his little car that he had for commuting back and forth. So there's that. And then the nice thing about some of these smaller things is they can, they're small, they're usually not too expensive. And you can get all kinds of like propane and other types of gas stoves like this one right here. You can get one smaller than this. I was kind of surprised this one was this big. I thought it was smaller because you can get smaller ones than this. And I think we have a smaller one. And Patrick showed me that, you can get a valve like this that you can use to refill these smaller tanks instead of constantly buying these little tanks. If you have larger tanks like, 5, 10, 20 gallon tanks for propane, then you can get an adapter like this and then refill it from one of those. Because it can get expensive if you're constantly having to buy these little things like that. They don't like to tell you about that. And they might even tell you, no, don't do it. It's scary. It's bad. Well, of course they're going to tell you that because they make money every time you buy one of those little containers. So there's a couple of options that are, that can be something you can just put away. It can be just for emergencies only. And also things that you can, have compact for keeping in a rig. Yes, a propane camping gas stove. We have like 2 or 3 of those, the kinds that are about this big with 2 burners. It's another option. You can just kind of fabricate something really small with a cotton ball and alcohol and whatever. There's all kinds of little tiny stoves you can make. However, things like that aren't, like this and that, they're not the best thing to use for like making bread. So that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. Like there's a lot of things you can do on top of a wood stove if you already have a wood stove. Like I will make biscuits and certain things, flatbreads and stuff like that. But just putting it directly on top of, I'm not talking about a cook stove. I mean, obviously a cook stove, because you're going to have the oven portion of it where you can stick your cookies, your cinnamon rolls, your pies, your breads, and they'll brown on top. But you can't really do that same thing on top of a wood stove unless you're going to flip it like I do with the biscuits. You can do pancakes. Obviously, you're going to flip those anyway. All that kind of stuff's simple. But I have a video specifically on this, and I've covered it a few times. And I think I might have also linked down below to my off-grid kitchen setup, which is in our living room, right on the other side of this wall. That's where through the winter I do most of my cooking and baking, coffee making, tea making, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a few years ago, I bought just a stainless steel, you just set it on top of the wood stove, and it's a Winterwell stovetop oven. It takes a really long time, and you have to have that fire just blazing hot for it to get hot enough to really brown the things on top. But it does work, especially if you can do like what I did and take an old cake pan I don't use to bake in, and I prop the bread pan up on top of that, and that gets it closer to the top. And then that actually helps it brown better. You can use Dutch ovens, the kind that are made with the lid that is a little bit concave, so you can pile coals on top. Just a one with a rounded top where you can't put the coals on top is not going to work so well. I've tried it, but if you can have some kind of heat source coming down on top, then you can get your things to brown. So that can be using in like an open fire on your wood stove, in your wood stove, etc. As long as you put some coals on top. So let's come back to the wood stove for just a little bit. Though I don't like to focus on the wood stove too awful much because not everybody can afford the cost of a wood stove or the space for a wood stove. It doesn't matter if it's one like mine, which is just a standard wood stove for heating with a nice big wide flat top that I use for cooking on because I don't have a place for a cook stove. We had to make the most of the space we had and the area we had. So that's why we went with that, not a cook stove, because we wouldn't have been able to fit one in that area. But the nice thing is if you can afford the space and the investment for a wood stove, you can use it for so many, many things. But you can not only use it for cooking and doing some baking on, depending on what other apparatuses you have to go with it. You can use it for heating water to wash dishes or anything else. You can use it for drying your laundry. You can use it for dehydrating foods. It is a multi-purpose thing that can serve you so many ways. That's why I think when it comes to wise investments into being a little more self-sufficient and ready for things that may arise, a wood stove is probably, to me, personally, it's right up there at the top of one of the number one things when we're talking about more expensive things to invest in. Now, let's talk about a few more cheaper ideas that also take up less space, and that would be a rocket stove. That's something I haven't done videos on in a long time, but a rocket stove is small. Ours, you can make your own out of bricks, patio blocks, whatever you've got. You probably can just find salvage material and build your own. But the whole idea is you have a really small fire. I would use like dried marshmallow stalks from my garden, echinacea stalks, or anything like that. If you got tree cones of any kind, you can throw those in there. It can be just little bitty sticks. It doesn't take much. But the drawback is you have to keep feeding it all the time. But I have actually done a lot of cooking on that in the past, cooking all kinds of different things on my rocket stove. And it's a fun thing to do. You can find videos on making your own rocket stove. Again, it can be really cheap. We bought ours. I don't even think they make it anymore, but it used to be the one I got, I think it's called Stove Tech, and I believe it was made in Oregon. And I loved it. I can just pick it up and carry it anywhere, which is a nice thing about that. Where if you're going to build one, typically you're going to build it in a place where you're going to want it to stay for a while. It's not going to be as portable. A lot of times you can find old cook stoves or regular wood stoves on places like, I always say, look at Facebook Market if you have Facebook. A nice thing about Facebook Market is you're more likely to find something that's closer to you where you don't have to drive so far or pay a whole bunch of money to have it shipped to you. And you're talking wood stoves, that's expensive. So we managed to get a smaller freestanding wood stove for our off-grid piece because Patrick's always shopping for stuff like that. So we got one of those. He also got a little small propane oven / stove like you would have maybe in a camp trailer. So that is currently in our little cabin out there at the piece of property we have down the road. That if you've seen any videos on that, you'll see it's just a cute little cabin that came with it when we got it. So right now it's where it's sitting, and who knows, it might stay there. It might, we might do something else with that as well. So now I'm going to turn my computer a little bit. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. You'll only be able to see the top of it. Right there is a Camp Chef camp oven with a stove top. I've never used a stove top, but I have used the oven. So again, that's something that runs off propane, and I have it over there. So it's next to the sliding glass door. That way, if I do need to use this, I need to fall back on this, I can just open that sliding glass door, and then that's where I'm going to get my ventilation. Or even if I really need to, I can just stick it out on the deck. So, when you're using stuff like that, ventilation is important. So I showed you the mini stoves. I talked about the camp stove, the rocket stove, the wood stove, open fire, the camp oven, the wood stove oven, and then there's the solar oven. Now, around here, that doesn't get used that much, especially now. When I first got it, I used a lot more than I do now. But now that my whole back garden is full of chickens and garden, my backyard, and my back deck is during the sunniest part of the year where we're getting enough sun to use a solar oven, I only get a few days of that. And then the grapevines, they shade so much of my deck now that I usually don't get as many hours as I once used to do. But it is nice to have. But that's what you'll see in the thumbnail to this video, is that old solar oven, which is not available anymore. I bought it many years ago. It's a Solarvore. But there's many different types of solar ovens to suit different people's lifestyles, small ones, big ones, so on and so forth. We hear a lot of good things about the All-American, but there's many, many more. And I actually compiled a few years ago some information on solar ovens, including a couple of different sites that showed you how to build your own out of just basically trash, cardboard, an old frame, picture frame with the glass in it. That can be your top. So solar oven is, especially if you live in a place that's sunny, that gets a lot of sun, especially if it gets sun all year round. It's a great idea. So go look up that video, because I compiled a whole bunch of different ideas and read the reviews and what got the highest reviews on the different solar ovens that are available out there, and then provided links to at least most of them, if not all of them. No matter what you use, we need to practice cooking with it before emergencies happen. Absolutely. And that's something I always try to say. And that's why with the rocket stove, I get excited. The rocket stove, this oven I showed you back here, the little oven for on top of my stove, even though it's not my favorite thing to use, I have practiced with it a few times so I could, can I at least do biscuits and a loaf of bread in here and be happy with it? And yes, I can. And now that I've got my tricks figured out, I'll know what to do if I don't have enough solar power to run my toaster oven for baking bread or whatever. It's a power outage too. So, because this is about in case of a power outage. Then the other thing I wanted to share with you, and this is kind of a funny thing, and I don't have a picture of it. We had the wood stove, but it was at the time of the year where we didn't have fires going. And so you're not going to go build the fire just to heat Pat his coffee up in the morning before he goes to work. And so I'm like, okay, what can I do? The power's out yet again, because that's what happens here all the time. If you remember those turkey, what are they called? Beer can chicken things. They're just a simple little stand. You put a beer can, that you've dumped or drank half the beer out of, you stick that in there, you put your chicken over the top, and then you barbecue it. And it turns out really good. We use those. We bought a couple of those, and that was kind of a novel thing, and it was fun. And it does make some pretty tasty chicken. However, that thing worked pretty good also for heating up his coffee. So I poured the coffee in, that we'd had made the night before, into a pot, set it on top of that thing, and then I set candles under it to heat it up. And that worked really good. It worked. It was just enough to be able to heat the coffee. You could do the same thing with soup or whatever. So any kind of thing that you could fabricate, some kind of stand, and you've got your candles, just light a candle or two or three or whatever, and put that under there, and just, it's going to take longer, especially the higher that little stainless steel thing is, or whatever it is you're creating. It'd be best if it was stainless steel. So the farther up the pot or whatever is sitting from the heat, the longer it's going to take. But it still works. In a pinch, it works. Oh yeah, and don't forget your barbecuer. I always forget that one, because it's like everybody has a barbecuer, so you don't think about it. But you can do a lot of stuff on a barbecuer. You can fry potatoes. You can obviously cook steaks. You can make any kind of casserole in there. If you treat it like an oven, you're just going to turn the heat way down. You can do anything in a barbecue. So if you have a barbecue, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people have a barbecuer. And, there's always that option. So then the other thing I would really like to have is one of those clay or brick ovens that you can build. Like a lot of people will get like a pizza oven or build a pizza oven. But I think I've seen people build the similar idea and have that be not just for pizza, but, anything that you want to bake in. That obviously would be something you would do outside. You know, it's just like anything else. A lot of times it's learning how to just make the most of what you already have on hand. You don't have to go out and buy fancy stuff. It either can be really, really cheap or something you can fabricate yourself. And I'm sure some of you remember, I actually haven't seen anything more about this since Cat's Cradle. She got one years ago. And anyone who knows who she is, she hasn't done videos. Once, in a very rare occasion, she might put a video out. But I used to follow her back before I started my channel. And she had one of those, I cannot remember the name of it, but it was a tea light oven. So you had to have like a ton of these tea lights to put in there. And she got that thing and was trying it out. But with that same idea, you know, tea lights, remember how I was talking about candles? You can find candles all day long at almost every single garage sale. Tea lights are the same. They're a candle, but you can, I have found piles and piles of tea lights, never once lit, at garage sales. So you could basically fabricate your own little oven using those tea lights and just having something that you could prop above that. Just like I was talking about with the beer can chicken holder thing, whatever that crazy thing was called. So sometimes, you know, an emergency, you know, remember, what is the saying? What is the old adage? That necessity is the mother of invention. You need something, you're going to figure out a way to make it work. So and this isn't about cooking or baking, but years ago, when we first got our first little camp trailer, we bought used, and it was small, and it was just, when the kids were young, Patrick, trying to make the most of whatever was around us, he was able to make it so that we could shower using the creek water, whatever. We'd always try to find a creek that we could park next to. We'd throw a hose down in there, and he would use the pump in the trailer itself and pump the water up from the creek. And then we could have hot showers using that without even having to keep our water tanks full. That was always a fun thing. So yeah, it was a little work. Yeah, and in fact, one year the water was we couldn't get quite close enough, so the water was so far down the bank. Patrick took like an old milk jug or something and cut the bottom, you know, the wide end out, and then hooked the hose up to that milk jug. So while one of us was showering, the other one was down in the creek scooping up water and holding it up so it would at least gain better momentum before it went down and then back up the hill, because the pump wasn't quite strong enough to pull it up that hill. So again, it's just about being creative with what you have on hand. You can do so much. Try to think of ways that you can, especially compactly, create or have something that you need in a case of emergency.